Okay, hello everyone. If you are hearing this recording, unfortunately that means that I cannot be with you this evening. And I do apologize for that, but I do want to thank you all for coming. Um, and I especially want to thank everyone involved with this project for including me. And I've been really honored to be a part of this and to have been selected as the artist in residence by the Broward County Cultural Division as well as the Broward County Aviation Department in partnership. So I think what I will do with this slide presentation is just kind of take you through the project from where it began to where we are now. And basically, if I'm able to Skype in, I'm hoping that I can answer some questions for you all after this is over. The presentation itself that I put together is around 30 or 35 minutes, so it's mercifully brief. But I do hope to be able to somehow have a discussion with you all. So let's go ahead and talk about how this began, though. It was quite some time ago, actually. There was a call to artists that went out statewide, and I happened to receive that through an email. And I was really pleased that I did. It basically asked for a request for qualifications, and as you can see here, it was a call to Florida artists, and it was the Public Art and Design Program seeking artists to participate in this Artist in Residence project at the Fort Lauderdale International Airport. And I took note of the section where they said that the artist shall document, narrate, or depict the development and construction of the runway and terminal expansion. And specifically, I noticed the language that said discussing the transformation of the airport and surrounding areas. And in that call for artists, it listed any number of ways that one might do this. So my prior projects really had me looking at different geologic spaces. I was looking at landscape a lot. Prior to this, I was working on a project in the gold mining fields of Australia. So this sounded particularly about this. Art really is just asking questions. That's kind of where we start from. It's useful to think about, what exactly is an artistic response or a creative response? How does one creatively document, narrate, depict a major construction project? It's not necessarily what one would think of as being common subject matter for artworks. And it's also useful to think about whether there might be a difference between objective mechanical depiction of things happening on a construction project, between that and a subjective personal response. So that's one of the things that I want to highlight during the beginning of this discussion right here, because I am an artist that works with photographic materials and video. There's sometimes an expectation around what kinds of imagery I might create because I work with that media. But I want to highlight the fact that the airport has a ton of imagery that they've been collecting from construction site photographers, as well as this really fantastic runway webcam that you can actually access through the airport's website. And though that kind of information gathering, obviously the webcam is literally mechanical, but the personal photographers that go out on site, they're looking for something very different than I am. They're looking for imagery that can actually serve as information. Frankly, the kinds of images I'm making might not be terribly useful to kind of demonstrate what is, actually occurred. They're a little bit more ambiguous, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But as you can see on this slide, you can actually view kind of a time lapse of what's happened on the site. So if you're interested in that kind of factual photographic imagery, there's plenty of that there for you. But what the airport and the cultural division commissioned me to do was to respond to this space as an artist with kind of no particular agenda that related to their needs in relation to the construction. So let's talk about that a little bit more. My response was a personal and subjective response. And as I say here, so what exactly is going to be or has already been involved with this experimental residency and long-term project? Well, several tons of dirt, multiple site visits, a slowly rising, inevitable mountain in the form of a runway, a makeshift community studio in the airport, many photographic frames exposed, printed, and tested, video gathered from above, below, and in between, and a thick blanket of black asphalt icing the dynamically compacted earth to seal it all in. So that's admittedly my poetically styled description, but that's really kind of the gist of it. And so I can kind of break that down a little bit more pragmatically. As we know, the impetus for this entire project is, in fact, the construction of this new runway at the airport, as well as the expansion. And the massive undertaking involves a significant transformation of the physical surround. So that has been what I've primarily focused on over these last almost 2-year period. It's, I say, where do I come in? I get to respond to this. And as I was just getting at earlier, rather than documenting the process of the construction itself and literally tracking changes in a scientific or methodical manner, my imagery may well be ambiguous and at times difficult to decipher. So my concern is not with constructing a temporal continuum that relates to the start and finish of the project, but with allowing the very nature of these structural transformations to dictate my response. So each time I come down to the site, I notice or I look at the space a little differently. And being able to come down here from Winter Park, not living here every day, I think has actually been a benefit to the project for me because I see the changes transpire in kind of a different manner. So a little note here, this first slide says dispatches from the blog. On May 13th of 2013, I made my first blog post related to the project. It says here, first airport images. Had the first real opportunity to begin gathering material today in the form of still photographs and video. Posting a few lightly edited test shots here. Probably follow up with some video clips. I was recovering that day from a particularly hot and buggy day. Yes, as I've mentioned, I've gotten to know those no-see-ums quite well. No getting around that. So about the blog, though, part of my process, it was really helpful for me to go through the footage and the imagery after each visit so that I could kind of make sense of things and see where I was as opposed to just letting it all pile up. So I did start talking about this project on my research blog, and as you can see here, I made about 18 posts May through this September, and you can actually link to that blog through my website, which is very easy to find. It's just dawnrowe.com, and under the links page, it takes you right to this blog. But you can get a sense of the project and how it unfolded. But I'm actually going to save you that trouble because right now I thought I would just kind of go back in time through some of those blog posts and highlight a few of the entries that I made so you can kind of literally go along through the project with me. So another one from back in May, I called Mounds, Piles, and Dynamic Compaction. In this entry, I had mentioned that we were on top of one of the fabricated inclines yesterday. That's what I'm choosing to refer to it as today, although I also like the sound of modified mound, relocated earth pile, reconstructed dirt mass, and so on. I was thinking of a lot of names for this, but I'm excited to start thinking more about this, specifically in terms of the sheer amount of volume mass involved in the project. The fact that an enormous amount of tonnage is being transported from one place to another to make this happen. That, coupled with the fact that this mini mountain is being built on top of a swamp, hence the need for the dynamic compaction, is fascinating to me. And I did really enjoy the opportunity to be on site there. In the left-hand image with the little tape blowing in the breeze, you can see the machinery in the background with its big metal plates, doing that process of dynamic compaction, flattening down that earth, a very monotonous task. So, Moonscapes in Ruins, this was another title of a post. Here I had said that moonscapes in ruins, that's what I was led to think of during this evening's visit. It's really enjoyable to hover around the periphery of the construction zones later in the day when they're quiet and the sounds of machinery and airplanes overhead are subtle. And you can see there's a little jet trail. That was an image on the left of when the piling was still happening, as well as on the right, that is now the complete runway. Hot rocks and cool sod, also from last spring. I said back then that I thought I'd put a few of these together as multiples so I can start getting a sense of how the imagery might work in that manner. Most of this imagery was gathered while on top of the limestone mountains that will eventually be the runway. I did ask to be taken back to the bottom as well, near the dynamic compaction, which is where I was introduced to this lovely sod hill. And then from September, ground and sky on top of the bottom of the desert dust. So interestingly, this was just about exactly a year ago. And I said in this entry, something struck me this time in terms of how it felt to wander around the periphery of the ridge, looking down the slope of the incline from the highest point on the site, the sloped, fabricated half mound that will be the top of the runway, with the highway below that bifurcates the space. Well, it wasn't so much looking down, but stopping and turning around. You're immediately transported to an arid, almost otherworldly landscape that seemingly extends as far as the eye can see. White sand, rock, stone covers the ground with nothing but a series of cans, poles, and flags coming between it and the blue of the sky. It's a strange feeling to be on top of such a flat expanse, feeling simultaneously grounded and suspended. And I'm going to show you an excerpt of the video piece that accompanies that photograph to get a sense of how this imagery functions in the moving form as well. So I'll let this run through. So another entry from that same day, I said, as well, I found myself fixated upon a certain lighting fixture run by a generator alongside walls being built on the bottom opposite side of the runway incline. Something about the heat emanating from the sun lamps in the mid-morning sun, sorry, not sun lamps, just regular lamps, heat emanating from the lamps in the mid-morning sun, causing this sort of flickering shimmer on the metal where the two light sources came into contact. Behind these bulbs, a swaying slice of iron hovers in the breeze, seemingly light as a feather, but knowingly heavy and precarious. Anyway, I found something really nice about all of that, and there's another video including the imagery in this photograph that I will show you in just a few moments. Another entry from the fall, last fall, earth and air, rock, sand, rope, and cloud. Here my entry said, I found myself thinking a lot about materials on this recent site visit. The wind was really whipping around, which was great. Little weeds and grasses were flopping sideways, and the plastic flags, tarps, and ropes were all over the place. Birds too, and of course planes taking off one after another. Always interesting to shift your gaze from ground level upward, the seemingly stable compacted dirt and concrete, contrasting with the shimmering surfaces of sky just a glance above. And then later that winter, there's a post called Tilting the Horizon. And this was an important one. It's a bit lengthy, but I want to read this to let you know what I was thinking about. The entry says, 2 of the proposed pieces for eventual installation in the airport take the form of digital kiosks, the kind normally used for commercial advertisements. It's been tricky to think about what sort of imagery I'll use for those works due to their unconventional nature, both in terms of how the work will be encountered as well as its format, that of a slim vertical rectangle. Yesterday, while out on a run through the hills, I started thinking about the Earth's horizon and the symmetry it helps produce when perceived in the form of the traditional rectangular landscape we're accustomed to, running straight through the picture plane or perceptual field left to right. Yet this same type of balance can also be present in the form of an angular line, the tilt of the hill, a hill against the sky, for instance, as you see in this image, or even as a vertical slice running up and down. Think about gazing out toward the landscape while lying on your side. And this line of thought really helped me conceptualize how I might interlace still and moving images together to run on a continuous loop on the monitors within the kiosks. So what I'd like to do now is show you one of the proposed works for those kiosks so you can have a sort of visual sense of what I'm talking about here. So I'll let this next video run through as well. Okay, so another entry, getting closer to where we are now, from back in January, that slice of sky. Here I said, I was curious what would happen on this visit, as it was the first time I visited the site while consciously thinking of depicting the space in a manner that might simultaneously work as a horizontal or vertical image, either moving or still. Not surprisingly, I was preoccupied by the way making relatively tiny slices out of the piled up dirt would allow the air above or beside to dominate the image. And similarly, by choosing to make little slivers out of the atmosphere, the space would flatten out drastically. Jumping a little later to April of 2014, this entry, Birds, Glades, and Trains. Here I said, I've begun to think a bit about the particular ecological and cultural aspects of the region the airport is serving, as well as the geological and natural materials that take on a different character, whether they are encountered in relation to the construction site or the general vicinity, including the parts on the periphery of the Everglades. And here you see contrasting images of the trains with the fill coming in, and two sort of wetland images with some birds. And later in May, Runways, Skies, and Horizons. On this entry, I said that with the runway almost complete, what is now perceived as an ordered yet chaotic sight will soon become entirely familiar. I traveled a bit further down into the Everglades National Park to think a bit more about the delicate ecosystem the airport is a part of. I found myself looking to the sky and the horizon, linking the birds in flight and the long, empty space of sky and water to the expanse of the long, uninterrupted surface of the runway and the sameness of the blue above in both spaces. From this July, an entry called Piled Earth from Near to Far, I say that the visual results of the modification of the land, impacted by either geology or technology, can seem strangely in harmony and discord simultaneously. These thoughts were at the forefront of my mind as I captured new images of the site, returning to many of the spaces that have become so familiar, taking note of the variance in accumulation and coloration of earth and debris on my favorite little, quote, mountains, and looking again to the palms and mangroves that line the periphery. And more recently, in August, cloud puffs and blue air. Here I said that I was really taken with the sky on this last visit, more so than usual. Having spent the last 15 months fixated on the ground and the transformation of that same stretch of earth, I realized the sky above had changed just as much. In fact, it never stopped. The constant movement of the clouds through the atmosphere and the incessantly shifting hue of the blue above make sure of this. So that kind of ran you through some of my experiences, and so now what will become of these images? Ultimately, I'm going to be producing a suite of artworks using this primary source material collected on site to craft secondary works. They'll combine the multiple photographic stills and video clips, resulting in a series of wall murals, light boxes, and those freestanding video kiosks that will be placed throughout the airport. Most of the works are still in progress, but I did produce a group of short videos last October that were installed on pre-existing monitors in Terminal 1, and those take the form of multi-channel silent works that run on a continuous loop. And this is an installation view of those videos running amongst the CNN and other news programs, which I actually think is quite interesting. And I'll show you a brief clip of one of those videos, the one that includes the lamps that I spoke about previously. So I'll let this run through as well. So I really enjoy how different that image is as a video as opposed to the photograph. There's something really beautiful about that movement with the light, as well as the heaviness of the black swaying object in the background. So, but where else can the work be seen? There's also, I've also completed an installation of 10 light boxes that are currently on view in the Lee Wagoner Art Gallery, which is in Terminal 2 at the airport. Those will stay in that space until October 13th, I believe it is, at which point they will be relocated to an area in Terminal 3. And Terminal 2 is very easy to access, and the gallery is in a pre-security area. And there are some other things going on as well. What else is going on? Well, one of the more unorthodox activities I suggested in my initial proposal for this project was this idea of a community studio in the airport. Because, as mentioned, I do live and work in Winter Park, where I teach at Rollins College, many of my visits have been, short-term, but these have been punctuated with several longer-term visits, including this current trip, which has me here, well, which did have me here through the end of this week. I'm not exactly sure what's going on right now, but I invite you all to come out to view the work that I just showed on the previous slide in Lee Wagoner Gallery and visit with me in the makeshift community studio, which the final hours are slated for tomorrow. Hopefully I will be there. Someone will let you know. But at any rate, I want to talk to you a little bit about that community studio. And this is a shot taken by Christina Roldan of me back in December when I did the first one near one of the information booths in the baggage claim area. And you can see me kind of working on making some photographs. I've got some work proofs out gathered around beside me as well. Here's another installation view, and you can see that I've set myself up kind of a portable ad hoc space. And one of the things I was thinking about with this idea was there were certain aspects of my studio practice that became somewhat portable because I had to make these repeated visits. And so I thought I could bring my little desktop printer, which you see here, external hard drives, my laptop, some paper. I could make work proofs and start working with the imagery, lightly edit some video. But what I also really enjoyed doing, as you can see in this image, was I went around to the construction site and just took plastic bags with me and little containers, little plastic vials, and just gathered different soil samples and different rocks and weeds and pieces of stuff from the site and started creating these still life images right in the studio I had set up in the airport. And I really enjoyed that ability to spend some time with this material in a different way, at a remove from the site, and start really just looking at it a little bit more intimately, I suppose. And here's actually one still life image of, I think that these are clumps of limestone, perhaps, but what I really love about this particular material is it's so soft that anything that comes in contact with it creates this imprint, as you can see in these two little areas that feel like these kind of old fossilized, old fossils, but in fact they're really quite contemporary. This was another image that I really loved. One of the things I found was a worker's glove just caked in mud and different residue, and I enjoyed making these sort of abstractions out of that piece. You can kind of get a sense of the fingers here, and the grass is seemingly sort of growing through it. So that was one of the things that I did in the community studio. And more recently, this last week, I had the opportunity to work with a group of students from Broward College who came out to the studio. This time the studio is actually set up right in the Lee Wagoner Art Gallery in Terminal 2. And here you can see the students working amongst themselves in different areas along the floor. And essentially what I had them do was we spent some time talking about my own process and my particular manner of working in relation to this commission. And then I tasked them with the challenge of coming up with their own creative response to the construction, as well as their kind of understanding and experience of it. So I had some basic art making materials on hand, the tissue paper, some modeling clay, pen and pencils, different backdrop materials, as you can see here. And then they also went outside, just right outside of the baggage claim, to gather kind of natural weeds and things as well, and different bits of debris, which they used to really amazing effect. And it was a really, really interesting experience. And here are just some examples of the creative results of their own process. As you can see, I also had a stack of about 300 work proofs of my own that I let them use as either inspiration or to incorporate directly into their own works. And what I love is just they each did something completely different, and that's what I was really trying to emphasize, that any one of us could respond to this set of circumstances in a very, very different way. So that's kind of back to what I was talking about early on, about art is about asking questions and sort of answering them for yourself. And this was a really creative bunch of students right here. So what's happening next? As many of you all know, the runway dedication is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, on Wednesday. And you can now travel all the way across it. What was once in kind of two chunks is now one long expanse. And so as far as what's happening next from my end, though, I have put forth a group of images for selection, which mentioned will eventually find their way take different forms throughout the airport. And to kind of take you a little bit more through my process, this is just a screenshot of how I had sorted the mass amount of information that I gathered. You can see that it's 141 gigabytes of information in the folder here, and basically that's just thousands upon thousands of still images and hours of video footage. So one of my biggest challenges was just to sort through all of this information and try and create something that would hold up as an artwork as well as in some way representative of this residency. This is just another screenshot that shows kind of my thought process in relation to sorting through the video files, categorizing them, and thinking about how I would pull those all together as well. This is a recent view of my studio wall. One of the primary modes of working for me is to print out test proofs and tack them to the wall and move them around and just start seeing how they relate to each other. And you can see some of the images here are in this proposed mural. This is just to give you an example. So not every image that I showed you will actually end up as an artwork. Just a very, very small percentage will make their way into the final works themselves. But this is one example of something that I have proposed as an 8-foot by 24-foot wall mural. And this is a very crude mock-up representation of what that digital kiosk will look like with that vertically moving imagery embedded within. And in closing, I'm just going to give you another sneak peek of one of the other proposed videos for the vertical kiosks, and I'll let that run through, and then this video will come to a close, at which point hopefully technology will bring me to you and I will be able to engage with you all and answer some questions. But for now, I'm just going to let this video run through, and thank you all in advance.